All right. Hey guys, good morning, or maybe it's good afternoon, depending on when you're watching this. This is our video for the week of April 6th. This week we are covering TCI Lesson 15, sections 1 through 7. So all of the sections that are available to you guys in TCI we'll be looking at today. Hopefully you guys had a chance to watch my video last week. I briefly outlined what our assignments are going to look like from this point on. We are going to take it one lesson at a time, one lesson per week, like I discussed in my last video. I will introduce the content to you guys on Monday, so today, that's what this is, and you have the opportunity to space it out however you see fit, whenever you can make the time for it. The only due date that you guys have to worry about is Friday at 11:59 p.m. That is when your discussion board posts will be due. So I will go over all of that real quick with you guys. Like I said, you guys now have the option to do one of two things to learn this content. You can either continue watching this video as I go through the slides with you. I will narrate, I will talk over it. Or if you prefer to independently read, you are more than welcome to do that as well. You also have the opportunity to do the reading and watch the video if you are struggling to grab this content. Okay, before we get into that, I'm going to go over the assignment with you that you guys will complete at the end of this video or reading, whichever you decided on. So, well, I guess like it says here, step 1 is going to be to listen to the lecture, so what this video is, the rest of this video, or to independently read TCI Lesson 15, like I said, sections 1 through 7. If it helps you to take notes, if you learn best that way, you should absolutely be taking those notes. Any notes that you do take, you may use to help you on the discussion board post. So there's an added little incentive there to make sure that you guys are retaining this information. So step 2, after reading, you're going to answer the questions on the Schoology discussion board post and submit by Friday. Again, Friday at 11:59. That is the only due date you guys have to worry about. Step 3, after you have submitted, the discussion board post will allow you to view other responses. So you need to be comparing your answers, make sure that you are on track, making sure that you had the correct information, that you learned the proper objectives, that you were able to complete those. And after you've done that, you guys are all finished for the week until the following Monday, a week from today, when you get your next content. So I've said this a few times, but we are in lesson 15. So this is the Roman Catholic Church in medieval Europe. And again, you have sections 1 through 7 that you will be completing as well. Once you have either read or listened to this video in its entirety, you're going to head to Schoology. So you'll see I've condensed our March materials. So you guys shouldn't need these anymore. Hopefully you are all the way finished with these comprehension checks. They have closed by this point because that due date has passed. So instead, you are going to click into this new folder here, the week of April 6th. Obviously, this video will be posted in this folder once I've recorded it. But for right now, the only thing in here is the TCI Lesson 15 discussion board. So there's a lot of instructions in here, so just bear with me, okay? Please answer these questions after reviewing the Lesson 15 contents. You can watch the lecture, independently read, or both. Notes are optional, but may be used to answer the questions if you do take some. Please respond to the following questions in one post, okay? I don't want 8 different posts. All of your questions need to be answered in one concise post, okay? All responses should be in complete sentences as well. I do not want any bullet points here. Please make sure that you are checking for proper spelling, capitalization. You have all the information, you have the notes, you have the slides, so there really shouldn't be a ton of spelling errors going on if you guys are being very intentional with your wording, with your responses. So section 1, you guys have 2 questions that you will be listening for. Describe 2 types of power that the Roman Catholic Church acquired in society after the fall of Rome. Number 2, in your own words, summarize the conflict between Pope Gregory VII and the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV. Use the words appoint, duty, excommunicate, beg, and authority in your summary. Now for this one, if you are listening to my lecture, you might have to head to TCI in order to make sure that you are properly using these vocab words, and that is perfectly fine. That is okay. Section 2, according to the teachings of the Catholic Church, what was the purpose of sacraments? Section 3, why did people undertake pilgrimages during the Middle Ages? What were some of the popular destinations of pilgrims? Section 4, in what ways did the art of medieval Europe reflect the influence of the Roman Catholic Church? Section 5, explain 2 advances in education during the Middle Ages. Section 6, the word holiday comes from what? And what types of things did Christian holidays celebrate? And then lastly, Section 7, explain at least one similarity and difference between Benedictine monks and Franciscan friars. Okay, so again, once you think you have those responses, you'll come down here, start typing out your replies. Again, use full sentences. You guys can number these. You can break them down by section like I have done. Okay, just make sure that it's organized. And again, you are using complete sentences. All right, so at this point, if you are uninterested in watching the lecture, if you would rather independently read, if you obtain information better that way, then you are more than welcome to click out, head to TCI and get started. For everyone else, kind of buckle in, maybe grab some popcorn, get a nice snack, because we have about 15 slides or so that we will be getting through today. Okay? So let me get set up here and we will get started. Again, note-taking is optional, but if that is something that helps you, you can pause the video, you can pause it on each screen, you can rewind me if you need to go back to something so that you can get all of the information that will help you. So our essential question for lesson 15, how influential was the Roman Catholic Church in medieval Europe? That is the question that we are seeking to answer. And our objectives for this chapter. You guys should be able to describe the structure and the role of the Roman Catholic Church in medieval Europe. You should be able to explain the conflict between Pope Gregory VII and Emperor Henry IV. Analyze the Roman Catholic Church's role as a political and intellectual institution. And then lastly, describe how the development of the arts in the Middle Ages was connected with Roman Catholic Church. All right, and here we go. So we are going to start with the introduction. So we're not quite to section 1 yet. You do not have a discussion board question that corresponds with this particular intro. So the Catholic Church in Europe had a heavy influence during the High Middle Ages, which again, thinking back to our last video, was the period from about 1000 to 1300 CE. So in Western Europe, the church was the very center of life. Okay, so not just the church building itself, although that was kind of the center of community activity, but the religion itself influenced people in a ton of different ways that we'll be getting into today. Christian belief was so widespread during this time that historians sometimes call the Middle Ages the age of faith. So people would look to the church to explain world events, so what was going on around them. They would use their faith, they would use their religion in the church to explain what was going on. Storms, disease, and famine were believed to be punishments sent by God. People hoped that prayer and religious devotion would prevent such disasters. So as a result, like I said earlier, people were very, very influenced by the religion. They were very devout, meaning that it really affected them in pretty much every aspect of their daily lives. Even more than that, though, people were more concerned about the fate of their souls after death. So the church claimed that salvation, or the saving of one's soul, would come to those who followed its teachings. So that was enough to, invoke a lot of fear into a lot of people. And as a result, they were very, very dedicated to their religious practices. Okay, so let's move on to section 1. All right, the Christian church takes shape. So the Christian church is one of ancient Rome's most important legacies. So again, we kind of have to think back to ancient Rome a lot of times throughout this unit. So Christians are followers of Jesus, who, according to Christian scripture, was put to death on a Roman cross in the 1st century CE. So thinking back, Jesus of Nazareth, we studied him for a while. He was crucified under Roman rule. Christians believe that Jesus was the Son of God, that God sent him to earth to save people from their sins, and that he rose from the dead after his death, again, by crucifixion, which, like we talked about, was a really common form of execution back in the days of ancient Rome. So initially, the Romans were persecuted. I'm sorry, not the Romans. The Romans persecuted Christians for their beliefs. So if you guys do not remember, persecuted means to cause a person to suffer because of his or her beliefs. So Christians were persecuted by the Romans until Emperor Constantine in 313 CE. So if you guys think back, Constantine was really the first to allow Christianity to freely operate in the Roman Empire. But it is not until 395 CE that Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. All Christians in Western Europe belonged to a single church, which became known as the Roman Catholic Church. So we talked about how Christianity separated into those two different sects. You had the Roman Catholic Church, and you had the Greek or the Eastern Orthodox section of Christianity. We are focusing specifically on Roman Catholicism in the western half of Europe. That is what we're going to be looking at here in lesson 15. So like we said, the church is very, very essential to medieval life. The church provided leadership, and at times it even organized the distribution of food. So people depended on the church for a number of different resources, whether it is guidance, whether it is political leadership, whether it is actually just obtaining the things that they need to sustain their lives on a daily basis. They turn to the church in order to gain all of those things. All right, so moving on. The organization of the Roman Catholic Church. So over time, church leaders developed an organization that was modeled on the structure of the old Roman government, actually. So by the High Middle Ages, they had created a system in which all clergy members had a rank. If you guys do not know, the word clergy means the body of people, such as priests, for example, who perform the sacred functions of a church. So again, by the High Middle Ages, everyone had a rank. It was a hierarchy. Okay, people had different levels, varying levels of importance and responsibility in the church. So of course, like you guys know, at the very, very top of the Roman Catholic Church is the Pope. He was the Bishop of Rome, and he was the supreme head of the church. He appointed high-ranking clergymen called cardinals to both assist and counsel him, so to give him advice, to help him lead. These cardinals ranked just below the Pope, in the church hierarchy. Okay, so you guys have this chart over on the right-hand side to kind of help you visualize this structure or this hierarchy. Next, below the cardinals came the archbishops. They oversaw large and important areas called archdioceses. Below the archbishops came just bishops, who governed areas called dioceses from great cathedrals. Within each diocese, priests served at local communities called parishes, each of which had its own church building. And then below the priests, you have just the practicing body, so the regular people who don't necessarily have a role in the church hierarchical system, but nonetheless attend different services, still devote their lives in various ways to the religion. They are also included on this particular chart. The increasing power of the church. So like I said, a lot of daily life revolved around the church. So as a result, the Roman Catholic Church is going to start to pick up some power here in a few different ways. The first way that the church is going to become more powerful is through economics. It becomes a pretty influential economic power. By the year 1050, it was the largest landholder in Europe. Some land was gifted to the church by monarchs and wealthy lords, while other land was taken by force. The medieval church also added to its wealth by collecting taxes from its people. Each member of the church was expected to give 1/10 of his money, produce, or labor to help support the church. The church also came to wield great political power too. So in the way that they are able to control the governance that is going on. Latin, the language of the church, was really the only common language that was spoken and written throughout all of Europe. And because church officials were often the only people who could read, they would typically keep records for monarchs, so the kings and the queens, and they became trusted scribes and advisors to those monarchs. So you really see the Catholic Church start to break into the actual government here as well. You see them gaining a lot of political power because of their ability to transcribe conversations, to keep historical documents, and to also spread information throughout parts of Europe. At times, the church's power led to conflict with European monarchs. So that wasn't always super accepted. You know, the monarchs, the kings and the queens, they weren't always thrilled that they had this whole other entity that was potentially threatening their power to rule. That people also looked to the Pope, they looked to the church for advice and to leadership. So sometimes, yeah, that would create a little bit of conflict between the political body, so the monarch, and also the religious body, so the Pope and the church. One key struggle involved Pope Gregory VII and Henry IV, who at the time happened to be the Holy Roman Emperor. So Gregory was elected Pope in 1073. He was incredibly ambitious, so he undertook several reforms, such as forbidding priests to marry, and he outlawed the selling of church offices or official positions. He also banned the practice that kings had the ability to appoint priests, bishops, and the heads of monasteries. Only the Pope, announced Gregory, had this right. So he really limited the power of the monarch at the time. Gregory's ruling really angered Henry IV. So like rulers before him, Henry considered it to be his duty and also sort of his privilege to appoint church officials. He called a council of bishops and declared that Gregory was no longer Pope. Gregory responded by excommunicating Henry. This action meant that Henry was thrown out of the church and therefore could not gain salvation. So again, salvation refers back to that principle that there is an afterlife, and as a result, your soul needs to be saved if you would like to have a happy go in this afterlife. So again, he was excommunicated. That means he could not gain salvation because he was no longer a member of the church. So that kind of left Henry in a bit of a tricky spot. So as a result, he ends up begging for forgiveness. He is allowed back into the church, and it's because of this action that the Pope's authority, the Pope's importance and significance is really solidified here. Okay, because in this moment, the Pope proves himself to be even more powerful, to have even more authority than the monarch, than the king himself. However, it's this particular conflict, this power struggle between the popes and the kings that's really going to continue on for the rest of the Middle Ages, for a long period of time. All right, guys, so that is section 1. We are going to head to section 2 now, which is on sacraments and salvation in the Middle Ages. This one is way shorter than the first, trust me, so just bear with me. Again, if you guys need to pause this, if you need to revisit certain sections, this video is yours to, pause and play as you need it. Okay, so section 2, sacraments and salvation. Most people in medieval Europe believed in God in an afterlife. So again, the idea that the soul lives on even after the body's death. And if you would like to have a positive afterlife, if you would like to have your soul ascend, sorry, that's not the correct word there. But again, if you would like to have a positive experience, that you must get salvation. And you do that by being a devout member of the church. You do that by following the church's teachings and living a moral life. So again, I guess I had it right below there. The church taught that people gain salvation or entry into heaven and eternal life by following the church's teachings and living a moral life. The church asserted that receiving the sacraments was an essential part of gaining salvation. Now, what is a sacrament? They are sacred rites that Christians believed brought them grace or a special blessing from God. So there are 7 holy sacraments according to the Roman Catholic Church, and here they are. Oh, excuse me. Oops. Sorry, guys, I'm going to grab water real quick. All right, guys, sorry about that. And we are back. So the 7 Catholic sacraments: baptism, confirmation, Eucharist, matrimony, holy orders, penance, and extreme unction. So you guys can pause this. You can read over those if you are unfamiliar. But again, those are the 7 sacred rites that Catholics must go through, again, in order to assert their devotion as an important step to gaining salvation. All right, section 3, pilgrimages and crusades. So there are 2 specific religious journeys that we'll be looking at. So the first is, of course, a pilgrimage. Most Christians hope to go on a pilgrimage at some point in their lives. A pilgrimage is a spiritual or religious journey to a holy site. So thinking back to when we studied Islam, one of the 5 pillars of Islam is to Hajj, or take a pilgrimage to Mecca. Okay, it's the same principle that you are going on a spiritual or religious journey to a holy site that is maybe specific to your religion, your own set of beliefs. So Catholic pilgrims specifically would typically travel long distances to visit holy sites such as Jerusalem and Rome. Pilgrims went on these journeys to demonstrate their devotion to God and to perform penance for their sins, or maybe an attempt to cure an illness if they could get closer to these really impactful religious sites. Maybe it would have a positive effect on them. A second type of religious journey that we'll be looking at is a crusade. So obviously you guys have read about the Crusades. Hopefully you watched the video that I posted. If not, you can go back and look into the March materials folder on Schoology, and you should be able to find it in there. Like I said, though, the second religious journey is a crusade where dedicated people would involve fighting for their beliefs. The Crusades themselves were a series of military expeditions to the land where Jesus had lived, which Christians called the Holy Land. Jerusalem, which is a holy city to Jews, Christians, and Muslims, became Muslim-controlled in the 7th century. So as a result, between 1095 and 1270, Christians in Western Europe organized several crusades in an attempt to recover Jerusalem in order to reclaim it as a Christian city. Many crusaders would act out of a deep devotion to the religion, so the people that went to actually go fight for their beliefs, for this cause. They did so for a number of reasons. Some people went on crusades to seek wealth, others to seek adventure maybe. Others went with the belief that doing so would guarantee them their salvation. So regardless of what the reason was, again, it is out of a deep devotion to their religion. All right, section 4 is on art and architecture, specifically, again, as it relates to the Roman Catholic Church. So during the Middle Ages, most art was created solely for a religious purpose. Paintings and sculptures typically would portray Jesus and Christian saints, and they would be placed in churches to support worship. At this point in time, most people, most commoners, could not read. So it is through these statues, it is through these illustrations that people had their exposure, that they could relate or even understand Jesus's life. Medieval art and architecture found their most glorious expression in cathedrals, which are those large churches headed by bishops. Cathedrals were built to inspire awe or wonder, and for centuries, they were the tallest buildings in any community. So compared to the buildings that we have today, typically cathedrals are about 30 stories high. Okay, so they're not small structures. Again, they're meant to be incredibly impressive and beautiful. They're, again, another act of devotion to the church. The cathedrals constructed between 1150 and 1400 were designed in the Gothic style and built to appear as if they are rising to heaven. I have some pictures on the next slide that I will show you guys, so just hang tight. On the outside are stone arches called flying buttresses. Yes, that is the actual name. Do I wish it was something different to teach to 7th graders? You bet, but nonetheless, flying buttresses. The arches spread the massive weight of the roofs and the walls more evenly. It was a really commonly used building technique that allowed for taller, thinner walls and more windows. The immense space inside a Gothic cathedral was lined with pillars and decorated with religious images. Beautiful stained glass windows were also a really common feature that would let in this really beautiful, colorful light. Hundreds of workers and craftsmen constructed cathedral by hand over many, many years. On average, it took from 50 to 100 years to complete a cathedral, but sometimes the work could take more than 200 years in some cases. So like I said, I have pictures for you guys to look at, for you guys to reference. So on the left-hand side here, we have two examples of these Gothic style Roman Catholic cathedrals, probably the most well-known example being Notre Dame in Paris. Notre Dame was constructed from 1163 to 1345. So it is definitely one of, again, those grander cathedrals that takes more than that 60 to 100 years in order to construct. Up here, this cathedral took about 66 years to be constructed. Again, Notre Dame, about 200 years or so. If you look to the right here, you will see the flying buttresses. So these kind of arches that are jetting out from the actual structure. Again, that is a way to support the roof, a way to support the wall, and it actually allows you to have more windows as well, which again, stained glass was a really important, not only architectural feature, but it was a really important art style as well. And you guys can kind of see that demonstrated here. This smaller cathedral, Sainte-Chapelle, is also located in Paris. It's actually located really close to Notre Dame as well. You can see all of the stained glass that just, panels the entire structure. And it is absolutely beautiful. If you ever have the opportunity to go to Paris, Sainte-Chapelle is beautiful. It is jaw-dropping. So I included that picture just so you guys can kind of see what the interior of a Gothic-style cathedral might look like. And then lastly, our guy over here, he is a gargoyle. So typically gargoyles were important and unique features of a lot of cathedrals. They are decorative stone sculptures projecting from typically the rain gutters or the edges of the roof. They were usually carved in the form of mythical beasts. Some people believe that gargoyles were placed as a reminder that devils and evil spirits would catch them if they did not obey the church's teachings. So that's typically why you'll see a lot of gargoyles located on these structures as well. All right, so moving on to section 5, which is on education. All right, so during the Middle Ages, most schooling took place in monasteries, convents, and cathedrals, so all being religious structures. Charlemagne encouraged the church to teach people to read and write. So if you think back to lesson 14, that's when we were first introduced to our boy Charlemagne. Charlemagne, of course, he filled his courts with scholars, and he loved when people would read to him various works. He was very much an academic, and as a result, he really encouraged that of his people as well. In medieval times, the clergy were the people most likely to be educated. So as a result, those who were fortunate enough or wealthy enough to attend school typically did so in a church. Like I said, you probably had to be of a certain social standing in order to attend these schools. So most of the students in church schools were the sons of nobles who were studying for careers in the clergy. So they were studying to go off and join the church as well. They spent much of their time memorizing prayers and passages from the Bible in Latin. Ancient texts were greatly respected in the universities, but the church was sometimes uneasy about them. When I say ancient texts, I am referring to documents, books, works of philosophers that were around from ancient Rome and ancient Greece as well. However, sometimes this sparked some conflict. Like I said, sometimes the church was uneasy about these ancient texts because there came an issue of faith versus logic. So the church taught people to be guided by faith. In contrast, ancient writers like Aristotle, for example, taught that reason or logical thinking was the path to knowledge. And it's because of this that the clergy feared that studying such writers might lead people to question the church's teachings. Where am I? So a man by the name of Thomas Aquinas was an Italian scholar of philosophy and theology. It's actually this man who tried to bridge the gap between both reason and faith. He tried to make the argument that you can have reason and you can have faith, that the two don't necessarily contradict each other, that they actually work together. He saw no conflict between faith and reason, and he argued that both were gifts from God. So the church should not shy away from these ancient texts like they had done in the past. Because of Thomas Aquinas, he allowed, I lost my train of thought, I'm sorry. It's because of his influence and his works that ancient philosophy and medieval religious teachings became unified. They were accepted together as one. All right, section 6, we are moving on to holidays now. We're almost there, guys. We have 2 sections remaining, so just bear with me. Medieval Europeans enjoyed many festivals and fairs that marked important days of the year. Again, like most aspects of daily life, most of these celebrations were connected in some way to the church. In fact, our word holiday actually comes from holy day. 2 of the main medieval holidays that were celebrated would be Christmas and Easter. So Christmas is the day when Christians celebrate the birth of Jesus. During the Middle Ages, Christmas celebrations lasted for 12 days. On Christmas Day, Christians attended church before enjoying a great feast, which was often held for everyone on the manor by its lord. The second major holiday celebrated during medieval times was Easter. Easter is the day when Christians celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. In Christian belief, the resurrection is Christ's rising from the dead. For medieval Christians, Easter was a day of church services, feasting, and games. Often the games involved eggs because they are a symbol of new life. Of course, that is a tradition that has carried on into modern times, the idea of Easter eggs. Other favorite holiday entertainments typically would include bonfires, acrobats and jugglers, dancing bears, and plays. Plays became a really common and popular form of entertainment and also celebration during the Middle Ages. All right, and finally, we're going to move on to section 7 now, monks, nuns, and friars. Religion was important to all Christians in the Middle Ages. Some men and women, however, solemnly promised to devote their lives to God and the church. So, like I said, religion, specifically Roman Catholicism, influenced regular common people in many aspects of their day-to-day lives. But there are certain people that wanted to go a step above that. These are our monks, nuns, and our friars. So let's start with monks. Monks were men who joined monasteries. Monasteries are communities devoted to prayer and service to fellow Christians. Men would typically become monks for many reasons. Some were seeking refuge from war, sickness, or sinfulness. Some came to study, and others were simply attracted to the quiet life of prayer and introspection. Whew, excuse me, guys. So in Western Europe, this way of life was created by Saint Benedict. If you were someone who followed his way of life, if you were one of his followers, you would be a Benedictine. So Benedictines made 3 solemn vows or promises. The first was poverty. So you promised to own no property. The second is chastity. So never to marry. And lastly, obedience. You promised to obey your leaders. Monastic life was one of the few opportunities open to medieval women who did not wish to marry. So if you were a woman and you wished to pursue this life, you would become a nun. Women who became nuns lived in convents, which were communities run in the same way as monasteries. Again, they were just separate for women. And again, nuns did most of the same types of work that the monks performed as well. So typically, monks and nuns would spend their lives in prayer, study, and work, and attend 8 church services every day. Other duties included caring for the poor and sick, teaching and copying religious texts. Since most monasteries were self-sufficient, monks and nuns spent much of their time working. They farmed their land, tended their gardens, raised livestock, and sewed clothing. So most monasteries were laid out around a cloister. Here we go, sorry, which is a covered walkway surrounding an open square. Typically in any given monastery, you would also have a church, a kitchen, a dining hall. You would also have a dormitory where the monks would sleep. And you would have a library writing room, often called the scriptorium, on the 4th side of the cloister, which provided monks a place to copy books by hand and create beautiful illuminated manuscripts. By copying rare documents, monks kept knowledge of the past alive. So much of what we know today about both the Middle Ages and ancient times comes from their important work. Okay, so moving away from monks and nuns, we're going to transition now into friars. So some people wanted to live a religious life without the seclusion of a monastery. So an example, one of our first instances is going to be Saint Francis. Saint Francis was born to a wealthy Italian family, but he gave up his money to serve the poor. He founded the Franciscans, an order that is also called the Little Brothers of the Poor. So instead of living in monasteries, Franciscan friars traveled among ordinary people to preach and to care for the poor and sick. However, friars lived in complete poverty themselves. So they had to work or beg for food, not only for themselves, but also for the poor, but also for the people that they were seeking to help as well. Francis loved nature, and he believed that all living things deserved respect, and it's for this reason that he is often pictured with animals. He's also known as the patron saint to animals, to nature as well. So he is over on the right-hand side here in illustration. So again, like I said, he's often pictured with animals because of his devotion and his love of nature. All right, guys. So we have done it. We have made it through all 7 sections. So that was a lot, and I understand that. So if you happen to break this up over several days, make sure that you go back and maybe review any material that you may have missed, and there's a typo, it should say, and then head to the discussion board on Schoology so that you guys can work through those 8 questions. Excuse me. Again, please make sure that you are posting your discussion board in one response using complete sentences, okay? So no bullet points, complete sentences. I don't want 8 separate posts or entries, just one that includes all 8 of your answers. And again, as a reminder, I will have my Zoom office hours on Thursday at 11 a.m. Thank you for those of you who stopped by last week. It was really fun to see you guys. We had a pretty good turnout. So again, if you have questions, concerns, or if you just want to stop by, say hi, talk to your classmates for 40 minutes or so, you're more than welcome to do that. And I will post the link to the Zoom meeting Thursday morning, probably around 10 a.m. again. Okay, as always, if you guys have questions, feel free to reach out to me, Schoology, Remind, email me, and I will do my best to get back to you as soon as I see it. All right, guys, thank you for listening, and I will see you, or I will talk to you, I guess, next Monday.